When did you know that the Mavericks were pulling this on Friday?
Honestly, I did not know until they actually sent out that injury report in the morning. And the reason that I was shocked is because Luka had been so dead set against it. Luka did not know when this talk began on Monday. It was news to him, and he tried to put an end to that news. I mean, it was very clear Tuesday he wanted to make sure that, listen, this ain't happening on my watch, basically. So that's the reason I was so shocked by it. Because, listen, you understand the logic, right? We all understand the logic. We all can look at the percentages and say, hey, like mathematically, they really made the right call. It's just, wow, what a kind of sorry way to slink into the off season and conclude. I don't want to say the most disappointing season in Mavericks history, but yeah, we can get in that debate. But just the fact that the face of the franchise was so adamant against it, and then to go the other way, just really shifting directions a few days later after obviously beating the Kings was shocking to me. And ultimately what they decided was like, listen, we know Luka's not going to like it, but you know what he really won't like is if we give up the number 11 pick in the draft to the Knicks and are that much more limited in terms of assets trying to build around him. Basically what I was told is, hey, ultimately Luka wants as much talent on the roster as possible, so they had to do what they had to do.
Why did they play to win against the Kings? Why didn't they just do it starting then?
I do believe that was in large part because you heard Luka on Tuesday.
Yeah.
Right? And Luka was just, I mean, by his standards, because you understand Luka is not a guy who enjoys doing media, very rarely talks after practices. By his standards, he issued a rallying cry on Tuesday. And so, again, that's why.
But, Tim, then the same rallying cry should stay for Friday. Like, okay, let's appease you and play against the Kings, and then we'll just go ahead and tick you off again. What's the difference?
Hey, the difference is the Texas weather. If you don't like it, wait for 5 minutes. That was kind of the Mavericks' plan last week.
What about Kyrie? We have any idea if he's on board or was?
You know what? I can, if you give me a second, I will read you the entire transcript from Kyrie's exit interview.
All right.
Here we go. Ready?
Yep.
All I needed was 1 second.
Excellent. Excellent.
So, you know what? I don't know. And I will say this. Kyrie knew exactly the kind of things he was going to be asked, including, obviously, about his free agency. You obviously remember that he made it clear, hey, I'm not going to discuss free agency during the season. When the season's over, I'll talk about it. Interpretive silence as you want, but if he's really gung-ho about staying, he certainly had a chance to say it, and opted not to. And then, I don't know the whole tank thing. I don't know if he had any thoughts on it, to be honest with you. I don't know if he was against it, for it. I have no idea.
Did he like playing here?
I think he enjoyed playing for Jason Kidd. I think he generally enjoyed the city of Dallas. Obviously you can't say he liked playing for the Mavericks because they didn't win any games, and it was, you go from being the fourth place team in the Western Conference after his first couple games to 11th place and tanking at the end. It is the quickest transition to a blockbuster trade to tanking in NBA history. I can assure you of that. I think it was a generally positive experience aside from the fact that the team was awful. I don't know that I can say that he just loved playing for the Mavericks, though, because, losing kind of matters.
Brian Windhorst, I know, has said pretty consistently that he thinks Kyrie will be back. We've seen other reports similarly. We've seen Vegas odds that have put it at more likely than not that he's back. Do you think that's shifted at all for people? I mean, do you think it's flipped at this point and it looks a little less likely that he'll be back next year?
So honestly, I think the reason that people believe it's pretty likely that he'll be back is because there's not an anticipation that there's going to be another max multi-year opportunity for him. We will see how things shake out with the Lakers. I would say that would be still the most likely scenario for Kyrie leaving. I don't know if it's Kyrie's preference to return. I do think it could end up being his best opportunity, but again, we'll see how things shake out in July.
Tim MacMahon joining us from ESPN on 105.3 The Fan. Do you think there's any chance, I can't even believe I'm saying this, that Luka Doncic is viewed as a bigger issue or someone that players would not want to play with compared to Kyrie Irving? Like the feeling around here from Mavs fans, right? Kyrie came in, he charmed everyone. He wasn't a problem. All zen. All his teammates are glowing about him like they seem to be doing in Brooklyn. Like, is there a chance that Luka leaves this looking the worst of the two?
I would say that Luka somehow managed to have a very disappointing 32-8-8 season. And, Luka is obviously young. There's a lot going on in his life. He's immature. There are things that, he wears his emotions on his sleeves. When it's going well, he's got that infectious smile. When it's not, his body language is terrible. I mean, you see him show up teammates sometimes. That can be difficult. His style of play can be challenging. So, there are going to be guys who don't necessarily want to play with him. Again, we can talk if you're talking about Luka, you have to talk about stylistically prime James Harden, right?
Yep.
That's who he is. He's his own version of that in terms of style of play. Harden didn't show teammates up like this, but I think the biggest challenge for Luka is in terms of people want to play with him are style of play. And then, he didn't grow up in the, American grassroots system. He doesn't have these relationships with guys dating back to AAA and the summer circuit, or AAU rather, in the summer circuit. He's not hanging out, with the Team USA guys after practice and all that kind of stuff. He doesn't have those relationships. So that's a challenge too, because stylistically, listen, say what you want about James Harden. Certainly there were times that people thought he and teammates thought he was challenging to play with, but you did have a series of stars that lined up for that opportunity. None of them ultimately worked out, and they ended up being short-term. And I think there's some personality issues there. But you had, first Dwight Howard, and then Chris Paul, and then Russell Westbrook. We'll see, and the clock's obviously ticking, but we'll see if the Mavericks can get guys of star caliber who say, hey, I want to play with Luka. And obviously they're hoping that they can get Kyrie to say, hey, I want to continue playing with Luka.
What were you thinking when you walked out of the press room yesterday after that amazing exchange with him?
No, I mean, that was fine. Like, the one thing I just wanted to make clear, listen, I did not say Luka is asking for a trade. Like, I'm not putting words in his mouth, and I didn't want him putting words in my mouth. So, but, Luka, he doesn't want the perception to be that he's a pain in the butt. Like, he got upset when I said earlier this year that he was involved in front office discussions and strongly pushing for an upgrade. Well, sometimes the truth isn't comfortable, but that was the truth. He didn't want the perception to be essentially that he was kind of trying to push teammates out. I get it. But at a certain point, you have to report the truth when it's become, just that strong. And this was the same type of thing. Listen, saying that if things don't improve significantly after the most disappointing season in the NBA this year, saying that if they don't improve significantly by the time he's only has 2 years left on his contract, which we all can do the NBA math, right? James Harden did it. Anthony Davis did it. Hey, KD bumped it out to 3.5 years, but you understand the math. Again, saying if things don't improve significantly, he could consider asking out. it's not like it's shocking news.
Right.
I mean, it's just really not. This is and by the way, it's not like, hey, I just learned this in the last couple of days. This is stuff we've been talking about for the entire season, right? And just to be clear, I understand how things get presented on Twitter and on Instagram and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I didn't write this as if it was some kind of shocking revelation. I wrote it just in the context of an obituary of this Mavericks season. It was buried into the story in context. I'm not sitting here trying to tell you this is some kind of like, oh my gosh, can you believe this? It's more no crap, people.
Well, what would you say to this statement? Luka will be loyal just like Dirk was here.
Absolutely not. I mean, that's ridiculous. It's like saying Kawhi Leonard would be loyal just like Tim Duncan. I mean, seriously. And I'm not sitting here like guaranteeing Luka leaves or anything, but like, dude, those guys are once in a few lifetime type of situations. Like it's not the norm. It's they're the exceptions. And like, if you don't believe me, just listen to Mark Cuban. This is the one time I'm going to tell you Mark Cuban was telling the truth, right? Mm-hmm. And what he said, I asked him straight, how does Luka? What does he think about, in terms of his long-term optimism? And essentially what Cuban said was, I think he wants to spend his entire career here, but we've got to earn that. And listen, I do think Luka's preference would be to spend his entire career in Dallas. I think based on everything I know, he loves the city. Loves Nick and Sam's, I can tell you that. But loves the city. He, generally has very good relationships with I'm not going to say the people that he works for, because we understand at a certain point with a star, the organization really works for the superstar, and Luka's at that level. Mm-hmm. But, with the people in the front office, coaching staff, et cetera, et cetera, he's a very prideful guy. Like, Luka doesn't want to be seen as a dude who had to kind of, run to a super team to have a chance to win a championship. He wants to be able to be the guy who it was built around. But the organization's got to start doing its part, right? Mm-hmm. And if, let's just be honest, the 5 years of Luka's career has been a complete organizational failure in terms of roster building to this point.
Sure.
So, I do believe that he wants to spend his entire career in Dallas. I also believe that the organization has done an awful job of making that an attractive option.
Was Jason Kidd on board with this entire, end of season decision, and what is his future here?
Well, yeah, you've had both Mark Cuban and Nico Harrison make it very clear that moving on from Jason Kidd after this season is absolutely not a consideration. And I will say this, and Jay Kidd kind of clumsily said it, but he was a coach of the year candidate last year whose team made a surprise run to the Western Conference Finals. So when you're evaluating Jason Kidd, you can't just throw out the fact that this team drastically exceeded expectations in his first year and then give him no credit there and then all the blame for this year. There's plenty of blame to go around. He can take a slice, but I don't think this is, hey, if you fire the coach, everything's fine. No, if you fire the coach, you still got to address the many problems that are above him on the list of things that went wrong this season. As far as what did he think, obviously he did not want to take any responsibility in terms of the making of the decision. But ultimately, I'm pretty sure Jay Kidd wants a top 10 pick on his roster over giving up, having nothing to show for Jalen Brunson. I'm sorry, for this bad season as they go into next season. And, it is funny. It's just irony is such a bitch. If the Mavericks give up number 11, that happens to be the jersey that Jalen Brunson's wearing for the New York Knicks. And obviously this pick's not from anything to do with him, but it is a little bit to do with him, because if Jalen Brunson's here, they're not in this situation. But you know what I mean?
Yeah.
To pay off the Porzingis trade. Oh, my goodness.
Tim MacMahon here on the Diamond Factory Hotline. So my biggest concern in all this, that's why we're asking you, were Luka and Kyrie okay? Like, did you send a sign to your superstars? Like, the bullets aren't that dangerous, but we still had, 2 bullets left. You go down swinging,
Mm-hmm.
and, does Luka Doncic want to be part of an organization? Like, I know we compare everything to Mike, but would this ever happen with Michael Jordan, with the Bulls? I know we had the Indiana Pacer thing early, young in his career, but did the Mavericks, leave a stain on Luka and Kyrie that, hey, we didn't believe in you guys, firing your final shot?
That's certainly a risk. And again, I think more than anything, it's the risk with Luka because he was so clear. He was so adamant. One of his mantras is, no matter what, you always have to believe. If there's any chance, you have to believe. And he's the same guy who was saying that when they were down 2-0 against a Suns team that had by far the best record in the NBA last year. And damn if he wasn't right. Now, ultimately, it turns out, and they knew this was a good chance, that the Grizzlies went out and played their G League squad in the last game of the season in Oklahoma City. And the Mavericks knew they needed help. They knew it probably wasn't coming. But again, man, for Luka to be that firmly against it and still do it, there's definitely some risk involved there. And, when he's asked about that yesterday, he basically said, I didn't like that decision. That's it. And, hey, well, did they did they discuss it with you before doing it? He said, of course. And basically, they came to an agreement. Basically, he wanted to make it clear, I still didn't like it. But I think at that point he was ready to, after it was done, he was ready to move on. And let's be honest, by Friday night, Luka looked very ready to move on. I mean, when he was on the court, he was out there chuckling with Vucevic most of the time. And, straight up, Luka's ready for vacation too. This has been a miserable season for him. He's got a big summer ahead of him in terms of, kind of the role he needs to play if this thing's going to get turned around. He's got to take the summer stuff seriously, not just when he's playing for the Slovenian national team, but
take what seriously?
Come on, man.
I just want to hear you say it.
Hey,
because we keep talking about this, and we keep talking about it.
Dude, Jason Kidd, at the end of the 2 seasons he's been in Dallas, his parting public message to Luka has essentially been, dude, you got to get in shape. And he words it more delicately than that. But, yesterday it's, hey, you've got to get ready for the marathon. And listen, the guy, he likes to eat. He enjoys drinking beers. We all can respect that. Hey, listen, whoa, hey, we've got something in common with an NBA superstar. But you saw, Dirk's always going to be the gold standard in this organization, and you saw, and Dirk was about this age when he really started taking that stuff seriously. You saw the kind of commitment Dirk had to diet, to conditioning, to really treating his body as like a scientific vessel. For Luka to ultimately achieve his, the top level of his potential, which is literally one of the all-time best players to ever play the game, at some point he's going to have to take that seriously, or he can come in to camp every year, and have to kind of play his way into shape and just be a guy who makes 15 All-Star appearances.
Tim MacMahon from ESPN. Tim, what is the expectation, do you think, the outcome of this investigation that the league's launched into their tanking?
I think it's a very slippery slope for the league, obviously. My guess, and this is just a guess, is that there will be a significant fine. But let's just be honest. They're fining the Mavericks for honesty. They're fining them for transparency. They're fining them for being so brazen about it. They're not fining them for tanking. Because if they're fining the Mavericks for tanking, they're fining a whole lot of teams for tanking. And you can say, well, who's tanking when they have a chance to make the postseason, to make the play-in? And I would say the Utah Jazz also did. They did. They had a little bit less of a chance, but the Jazz have been tanking for longer as well. It was a unique shift late shift into tanking that was embarrassing for, really for the NBA, especially when they came up with the whole play-in scenario to avoid situations like this. But you can't find one team for tanking when it's an epidemic in the league. I guess you probably can find one team for doing it. So not even obviously, but like just saying it out loud.
What have other people around the league said to you about what the Mavs did, and do you personally agree with it?
So people around the league basically have been like, I get it, but what's Luka think?
Right.
And that's kind of where I stand too. Like, listen, I get it. Percentage, like, what was the best play statistically from an analytic perspective? This was obviously the best play. But honestly, this week showed a real lack of direction in the franchise because if you're going to do this, what the hell did you go beat the Kings for?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so for plans to just shift so suddenly from day to day is a tough look. And that's the other thing that you've heard a lot of around the league is basically like, man, like, is there a plan there? Like, is everybody on the same page? What's going on?
Christian Wood next year is doing what to start the season?
I don't think it'll be anything here. I'm sure he'll be on an NBA team. I think it's going to be a pretty tough market for him this summer. And I don't anticipate that the Mavericks will be honestly, I don't know that the Mavericks will bring him back even if they can do it on the cheap.
What's the issue with him that obviously a quarter of the league has agreed with, but freak athletically, offensive game. We know the defensive issues, but what were some of the other issues you saw or heard up close?
Yeah, no, listen, the guy can score. He is a phenomenal scorer. And if he really embraced being a bench scorer and kind of poured himself into that role and, committed himself to being a team guy, then he'd be getting paid this summer, right? And the Mavericks might be the team that was paying him. But it's tough. Role and in general as a team, last year the Mavericks didn't only have role acceptance, they had role enthusiasm. But when your coaches are telling you, this is your role, and you're like, no, it's not, I'm a star, that's tough. And then you're blowing defensive assignments. And my understanding, in the past, he's been like chronically late. Like, I was told in Houston they had an over-under on how late he'd be to do his workouts, and it was usually set at like 35 minutes. My understanding is that he would be technically on time in Dallas. Like, that wasn't a major problem. But, like, if it's an 11:15 meeting at the hotel, he'd be grabbing his breakfast at 11:14 and sitting down, that sort of a thing.
Yeah.
He's just the knock on him is he's just not he's not a malicious jerk. I just want to make that clear. Like, he's always been pleasant with me. I don't know any even coaches who couldn't wait to get rid of him told me the guy's not a bleep. But he's just not a team guy. Like the swap of Jalen Brunson for Christian Wood in terms of the chemistry of this team was a complete catastrophe. I'll tell you that. And then, defensively, does he block shots? Sure. For every shot he blocks, there's 5 or 6 blown rotations, and it's just very difficult. Basically, he is perceived as a guy that coaches cannot rely on. That'd be the way to sum it up.
Last one. What changed? Did covering Kyrie for this period of time change your mind drastically about him? And if you were LeBron, would you rather have Kyrie or Anthony Davis as your running mate?
No, Anthony Davis without question. And I would say that, all of my interactions with Kyrie have been generally positive interactions. I was pleasantly surprised that I actually enjoyed covering him. Has it changed my perception of him? No, it hasn't. Simply because, you understand this was a very brief time that he had all the incentive in the world to not create any kind of issues, but he didn't. He did not create any kind of issues. He was a positive guy in the locker room. He was not the problem. He just wasn't the solution. And there's no chance I would rather have him as your running mate than Anthony Davis. And honestly, if you give anybody with the Mavericks true serum, like, would they do a sign and trade that would get Anthony Davis back in Dallas? They would do backflips if they could pull that off. Are you kidding me? I mean, just absolute backflips. But, like, the chances of that happening, like, I don't even want to I don't want to pump up any hope whatsoever because, number one, AD's value is significantly higher than Kyrie's. Number two, I just don't know why the Lakers would cooperate with that. And the only possible way it would be is if Anthony Davis is demanding out. And then even if that's the case, again, I think his value is significantly higher. So, but yeah, I would rather have the guy who can be a dominant defensive anchor for sure. And I think if you watch the Mavericks, you'd realize a dominant defensive anchor is something this franchise could use.
Thank you for waking up. The voice sounds even deeper, even better. Have a great playoff run, and the cotton candy's on me for life. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Always a pleasure, fellas.